Hello, it's React time. React to DesignerDave and what he's got to say. The first part is on Abelhawk's channel. Second part's on DesignerDave's channel. Check them both out. First part being part 7 at this point because we've watched a few of these now. How are RTS games balanced? Oh my god.
DesignerDave, wake up. More Warcraft questions await, and you're going to answer them.
Died really dark.
Oh god.
And not again.
Not again.
Yep. There you go.
You know, this was originally supposed to be just a 2-part series. There's only so many questions about Warcraft that you can ask.
Samurai
Right.
Dave.
Let's do this.
I'll play around with the webcam and the chat. See if we can find a nice position for it.
Question number 1. How does the balancing process work in a competitive game like Warcraft 3? Do you try to balance the game based on opinions of professional players or win-lose statistics for specific matchups? Neither. Generally, the balancing
he reads
for
it out.
an original RTS, so in this case, Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos, it's unit matches and numbers. So you'll create a spreadsheet that has all of the numbers of the units, their attack rates, their DPS, their hit points, and you'll do comparisons between them. And in that way, you'll have a spreadsheet that basically says, these guys are roughly equal to these guys. And then you can give them a power rating based on what their stats are. So for example, let's say that their hit points are valued higher than other stats, then hit point value times 1.2 would be their power rating. Not explaining as well. Let's make an Excel sheet. All right.
He just fucking sneezed on
Start
me.
from scratch here, and let's say that we have a unit name, hit points, DPS, and move speed. So you would have, let's say you have a Marine and you have a Zergling. Hit points of a Marine.
I got a cough now.
Don't worry about it. Oh, right. Cost, DPS.
He's building a new game.
Attack type. There. Now you can see we've got a number of values here, and you can sort of do a comparative analysis of what these things will do against each other just in the spreadsheet alone. So,
because that will
now
help
wanna
you balance it
calculate
much more efficiently than having to
power
keep
level
testing in the world at
there.
the Warcraft
Let's
editor.
use this is not a good example necessarily. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. DPS, let's say that has a very high value, a multiplier of 2. And let's say that hit points is super value. It has a value of 1.5. That has a point value of 75.
I'm already confused.
Plus DPS value multiplied by 10 plus their speed. This one we're just saying it's equal to its value, whereas DPS is more important. And then we're going to parentheses all of this and subtract its cost. And then if it costs to, like, let's say gas or something like that, it would have even more calculations based on that. Anyways, this comes out to a power level of 50. And this one comes out to a value of 34.5, which makes the Zergling, based on the cost analysis, it makes the Marine much more valuable than the Zergling.
But you get 2 Zerglings, don't you?
Yeah.
For every 1
I
Zergling.
expect that. I'm not saying this was a good example. Don't use these numbers. But if you did StarCraft or any RTS, you would start with a sheet like this to sort of get an idea of what the power levels.
I wonder what this says about Night
power
Elf.
levels of things are. And let's say that hit points you decided were less valuable. You might take the hit points and now it's only 1.2, and then you would recalculate the formula across the board. And there you'd have a closer value between the two because you've devalued the hit points in terms of what they mean. I hope that gives you a basic idea, but basically you're determining the point value of each unit before you even do anything. That's the first layer. The second layer is that you then do testing in the game where you just throw units at each other of equal values and see which one comes out ahead and whether these power levels work or not. And then you can adjust the power levels based on DPS is more valuable or DPS is less valuable, things like that. So then you have these relative point values, and then you have the real testing of throwing the units at each other, and then all of that is for an RTS that's never released. You can bring in pro players, but like if you're bringing in StarCraft pro players to play Warcraft 3, you're really going to be able to judge that? They're seeing it for the first time? Not really. So you kind of have to release it and then see what happens. And then if things just seem overpowered,
Early access, boys.
and so on. And then it's a balancing act. And a lot of it is intuition. A lot of it is feeling, and a lot of it is just seeing things take place, like in tournaments where, like, if everyone's playing Terran, then clearly there's a problem, right? So then you look at the Terrans and you go, what's making them OP? What are people using? What are they destroying? Is there a counter to this strategy? And so on. And especially in an RTS that has multiple sides that are not congruent, there's a lot to take into consideration.
Yikes.
So it's very difficult to balance an RTS, especially when you have
It's time to spin
ambiguities
again.
between the different races that you can play. That's
Thank
basically
you.
how it's done. You start with the spreadsheet, you do unit testings in the game, you play internally a lot, and then maybe if there's pro players, you can bring them in to do testing, but ultimately it's just going to take...
It makes sense, but I guess the designers have to come to some sort of agreement as to what a power level, what a priority rating is, because I think he sort of was like, say for example, movement speed is really important in this game. So if a unit has high movement speed, then it's going to have a higher multiplicator, which is going to increase its power level. So then it might lose stats otherwise, because its movement speed has caused it to get such a high power level. But someone else thinks, oh, movement speed is not that high and important. Perhaps big hit points are much more important. So, but it's an interesting way to look at it, because it's not as simple as just the cost, hit points, and DPS. It's like the value of, the attack speed or the actual main focus of damage. Like if it's a real high output of damage, like Crit Fiends are really technically a high power level unit, because in Warcraft 3 there's a thing called micro. If you just have two units standing still, two range units standing still and going at it, then a Crit Fiend and a Rifleman might be a bit more similar. But if you actually have two people microing, the Crit Fiend's going to be a lot better, because Crit Fiend does a ton of damage, but obviously a very slow attack. So then you pull it back and then you sort of bring it back in just as it's ready to attack again off cooldown. And the Rifleman's not getting any value out of this fight, because you've got the Unholy Aura as well that affects the ability for the Crit Fiend to do its mass damage.
Time to balance something. There's no such
Thank
thing
you,
as a
Fliptus.
perfectly balanced RTS, unless they are 100% equal sides. Like like if you're playing human versus human in Warcraft 2, obviously there's no issue there. But those don't make for very interesting RTSs these days, now do they? Regarding the random factor in items being dropped by neutral camps, dropping certain items like Book of Dead,
At last, humanity will
Mr.
rise
Taker.
again. It's about time.
Wouldn't it be better
Never
for neutral
trust
camps
an
to have
elf!
some kind of currency that could be exchanged for general use items?
Hey, thank you very much there for the raid. Hope you're doing well. Just talking about game balance here in Warcraft 3. This next question, be it, could result in an unfair advantage for one of the players simply because of luck. Yep, it's definitely my excuse whenever I lose, is luck. Wouldn't it be better for neutral creeps to drop some kind of currency that could be exchanged for general use in the neutral shop?
In the neutral shop. Well, first of all, I believe that in the melee maps, the drops are consistent. So you kind of know where they are and what they would drop. I'm not 100% sure on that. I know we discussed it at some point, but I actually don't remember how that turned out. Why don't we look at that? Let's open a melee map. Let's open Garden of War. Here we have
Witty's
camp,
Adventures.
100% random level 4 permanent item.
Adventure of Witty.
Right. Okay, I remember what we did. So during the balancing of drops, what we did was we categorized them by levels. So these are considered level 4 items. And so it becomes another balancing act of what constitutes a level 1 item versus a level 2 item, and generally they should be roughly on par with each other. So you'll see here, a Rod of Necromancy, if that drops as opposed to the other person gets what? Potion of Speed. Yeah, the guy with the Rod of Necromancy definitely... See, I would maybe bump that up to a level 2. But regardless, there's a lot of balancing that can happen here. But it was decided early on in the development of Warcraft 3 that compared to StarCraft, Warcraft 3 would have more randomness in it. And that is reflected here.
Can I up the sound? Yeah, he's a bit quieter in this section, so I was just playing around with it.
Potential for item drops being not necessarily as useful between camps. That said, I think that they're okay in terms of what you can get, and relatively inconsequential, though a Rod of... I would definitely bump that level 1 Rod of Necromancy to a level 2. That seems a little bit wacky. So while you're correct that it would be better in terms of fairness to give currency, which then could be exchanged for items, that could be like a separate currency, like creep currency or neutral currency, something like that. I just don't think it's that fun.
Cryptocurrency.
And there are maps that don't necessarily have a place to purchase anything.
I don't like it,
every
but I
map
like
would then
it.
have to have a neutral shop, which you don't necessarily want to do. It would be more fair but more limiting, and I think that the random factor in Warcraft 3 is something that people generally accept, like the randomness of crits and things, which all were discussed being.
Has anyone asked Dave whether he got to design a creature? I was wondering that, actually, looking at these. It's like, did he get a chance to, like, Sam might be like, oh, you know, what creature do you want to put in here? Or what do you want kobolds to look like? Or was that just all on Sam?
We had discussed at some point, like a long list of things that could potentially be removed to make it more fair and balanced, unlike Fox News. Warcraft 3 is known for many micro-intensive mechanics, performing surrounds on enemy units to prevent them from escaping, focus firing with ranged units, path blocking, often done by Night Elf players with...
Whoa. Hello there, Alexa. Yeah, you're watching me. You're watching me on stream, twitch.tv/WTii, watching YouTube videos after coming here from watching my YouTube videos. Warcraft 3 is known for many micro-intensive mechanics, performing surrounds on enemy units to... Wait a minute, this isn't even a question. I don't want to transcribe all of this. Oh, that's why I stopped there.
Them from escaping, focus firing with ranged units, path blocking, often done by Night Elf players with wisps, denying your own units to prevent other players from getting XP, evading enemy projectiles by using item skills at precise timings, and many others. Were these mechanics taken into consideration already at game development stage, or was it something that was discovered by professional players? It was discovered by professional players. These mechanics were not necessarily thought of as useful or even good. For example, denying XP, definitely something that we didn't discuss or consider. And
I'd think a whole ton of stuff is basically just designed or developed over time by the player base themselves. It's the tricks of the trade that people find out over time. I don't think the developers have any real plan on those things without them existing previously. It was just a lucky result, you know. It's like, we just want to create this game. Here's a bunch of units. Here's what they do. Here's how they move. Here's their abilities. And then the players will decide what it is that you can actually get out of it.
Did not like when we started seeing it being used. Evading enemy projectiles is pretty much...
Sorry, just to pause in one more time. That thing really annoys me. Anyone that sort of... This is talking World of Warcraft wise. When there's any sort of... speak of World of Warcraft story-wise, and it's got like any sort of this was planned behind it. Nothing was planned. They barely probably even knew the Warcraft 3 story before they actually got the Warcraft 3 story out there. That was probably just barely fleshed out, let alone anything else that came after that. So when you think, oh yeah, no, this is all part of the plan, yeah, this is how the whole story was supposed to go, bullshit. They probably barely just about got Arthur sorted.
A bug. Using items and skills at precise timings, that was of course sort of expected. That's certainly something we thought about. Now in terms of surrounding enemy units, like pathing was always problematic in the game and was just sort of seen as something we accepted because it couldn't be overcome in the time that we had. There's something about pathing for games that is always problematic. Maybe it's less problematic these days, but like nav meshes and things like that, all these crazy solutions that take a lot of time, like we couldn't do those things. But if it were up to me, I would approach that element again, and I would have it such that big units could push their way through small units. And I know that's controversial because some people are like, no, this is part of the skill. And I'm like, well, then it's also part of the skill to know which units can block other units. And then it becomes a whole another level of mastery there. But yeah, people don't like change. Nowadays, many games have a monetization system based on skin and cosmetics. Wouldn't it be possible to add something like that in Warcraft 3 Reforged for the game to be more profitable for the studio? For example, adding Burning Blade or Warsong stylized skins for orc units. That would be cool in my opinion. Yeah, there are certainly many ways that Warcraft 3 Reforged could have been monetized to make a lot more money and satisfy the angry profit.
I remember when we used to theorycraft. This must have been like 3-4 years ago now. We were like theorycrafting as to what microtransactions they were going to like stick into the game. Like start your melee games with an extra 100 gold. Obviously, this is a lot of this was tongue in cheek, so that wouldn't be like. But start with an extra 200 gold or something like that, or you can level up your warden 50% faster if you buy this booster pack. So in your games, your warden would level up quicker. It's just all of the microtransactions were basically just all awful. They were like joke ideas because there's no way you can really put anything other than cosmetics without it affecting the gameplay.
Tiering gods of capitalism, but I don't think that's necessarily what people would want from Reforged. I would save that for Warcraft 4. I think Reforged, everything that was being planned for it was quite cool. And I think everyone would have loved it. It would have been in the same vein as when Warcraft 3 released what games were at that time, which is that they were completed products that you played and enjoyed and created with for years to come without having to do additional monetization or anything like that. If anything, I would say that customized skins would be something you would earn through playing the game. And let's say that you finish the Orc campaign, you get a custom skin.
Yeah.
Maybe multiplayer stuff could give you skins, and playing a certain amount of matches could give you skins. Like, those are the sort of...
Behave yourself, hey anal. I'm not sure why you got such a gripe, but calm yourself down.
things that back in the day that we would do, that we've sort of lost now in this age of monetization where everything has to be monetized, that I hate. Was there something in Warcraft 3 story that surprised you, shocked you, made you angry, or you agreed fully with? How was the developer's reaction to the character's story, like Arthas' fall? We all enjoyed the storyline, generally speaking. Was not totally happy with the ending. It was kind of a bit of a Deus Ex Machina with the blow a horn and the Night Elf spirits jizz on Archimonde. But yeah, my favorite moment, of course, is Arthas' fall. That's something that really spoke to me. It's this journey from
Need 18
good
plus
to
for
evil,
Warcraft 3 now.
effectively. But really, it's the steps along the way and how someone can go one step at a time towards thinking they're doing the right thing when they're actually on a dark path. And then by the time they recognize it, it's too late. Though I wish Arthas had struggled a little more, just a little bit more struggle with like some of the things he was doing.
He was very quick to just go full arsehole mode. That's the way I see it with Arthas. he is very much a hothead, but like a hothead times 5.
Because he was very much self-righteous the entire way through, and people blame that on the Lich King and whatever, but I think it might have been more interesting to sort of showcase how he did question it, but that doesn't make for a very conducive thing for every match is a fight kind of game like Warcraft 3. Did the campaign design start during alpha beta test or other time period? Did the old models, units, characters, designs have any impact on the current design of those campaign levels? So it's difficult for me to answer the second part of the question, but I can tell you the first part of the question. The campaign design basically didn't start really until we were fully on the This is War 3 boat, which is to say that we had determined the direction that it was more RTS focused than RPG focused, and we sort of had all the main characters in mind, with a couple exceptions. I'm sure the old models and units were used or reused for the most part. The only one that I can really think of that didn't make it through was the Orc Chieftain model, the guy on the wolf. I think that got repurposed or set aside. In By Demons Be Driven, Manaroth's Earthquake ability was changed to Finger of Death. Was Manaroth...
There's another model that's really weird. I don't know when it was created, alpha or beta, but it's the Wolverine-looking grunt. There's an orc grunt type character that looks like a berserker. It's got like 2 claws, so it's like a shaman kind of thing, but it's like shirtless, and it's got like Wolverine hair. It looks like 75% finished, but you never see that used in any way, shape, or form, as far as I know.
Originally intended to be a final boss, but instead he ended up only appearing in the cinematic. I do remember the talks about what this mission would be, and Manaroth was definitely intended to be a boss that you would fight. But because the cinematic featured the characters defeating him, it was sort of decided that no. And there was even plans to have the canyon in the back of that mission, but that didn't work out. So let's open By Demons Be Driven, actually.
I never felt disappointed that you didn't get to kill Manaroth yourself, so I guess it worked out, at least from my perspective. I think the story from the cinematic was cool enough.
Yeah, see, the plan was to have the canyon somewhere in this map, and I guess I didn't know about it. But
In
you see how it's all
Reforged, they put the
canyon-like,
canyon
and
in.
I put a lot of canyon stuff, and like these are supposed to look like canyons, but I didn't quite make the canyon that was supposed to be part of a backdrop because I figured you just wouldn't see it during gameplay. But now that I'm looking at it here, where you defeat Grom Hellscream, I definitely could have done it. Definitely could have built a canyon out here, and that just make it inaccessible, like, you know, I don't know, something, but something you can view. Oh well. I guess that's one of those things that I would have changed if I had thought about it more, but I didn't even know what the cinematic was when I was making the map. I just knew that it took place in a canyon and that they defeat Manoroth, and therefore you can't defeat Manoroth in the map. But yeah, originally you were going to fight him. I think that was an early idea, was that you're going to fight him, but it was not written as such by Metzen. Therefore, it was never part of the campaign plan.
Never even really thought about it that much, but it's kind of cool from the concept of, in order to defeat Manoroth, you essentially rescue Grom. And then by killing Manoroth, he kills his own demons. And in this level, he is basically a demon. He's like all red.
And I guess we just didn't put the canyon into the map.
We must face Manoroth in the canyon.
Oh well. Did they do it in Reforged? I don't actually know. In the last mission of Reign of Chaos, if Tyrande casts her scout ability before the human base is destroyed, Archimonde would summon a dark portal at the location of the Owl Scout, and he casts other spells when player attacks him. However, if player attacks Archimonde after losing the human and orc bases, he would only attack without casting the spells. Why? Is a bug. He would only attack without casting the spells. Why?
You got a very brief moment to read that. In Twilight of the Gods, why does Archimonde cast Dark Portal at the position of Tyrande's Scout Owl as she casts it before the human base is destroyed, but not cast any spells afterwards?
Why? Is a bug. Is a bug in the AI. I remember something about that, but I don't know specifically what the bug was or why he behaved that way. But yeah, early on you can distract him, and later on, I guess they turn it off. They turn off his ability to cast spells because of that. And unfortunately, opening the map wouldn't help because the problem is it's in an AI script, I believe. Actually, you know what? Let's open it up anyways and take a look. This map is chunking. Okay. There's a couple trigger safeties here that I'm seeing. Basically, if he's being kited, or if it's over, basically, he does moves and then attack moves. So it seems like there's still ways to F with him. But that would be why he would stop casting, because he's being ordered to move. And it seems like that safety towards the end would be something that would cause that. So if you distract him too much with spells, like, he'll just move straight there. But the main thing is that the behavior where he casts spells at the sentry is that's a bug. He doesn't have an AI script, but I don't see enough triggers for Archimonde.
Well, that's how you get off to a good start on that level then.
Weird. Yeah, that's just a bug.
Send an Owl Scout to Archimonde.
But I can't find his AI script or what AI script they used, so it may be a custom AI script. I don't know whose map this even was, but hopefully they can answer that question. There were players who used Goblin Landmines to kill Archimonde. Does it prove that the damage from Landmines is pure damage which could not be reduced by devaluing armor type? Yes, the Goblin Landmines are pure damage. They are effectively true damage. And you can see that if you look in the unit editor. There they are. How do Goblin Landmines work? I don't actually know. Oh, I wish I had a search function. I wonder how much time was lost when making our campaign maps just to trying to find things that we didn't remember.
You actually have a search function in the Reforged one, but I think he uses before.
There it is. These look like a hack. And I'm suspicious that they were kind of hacky. But I know they're true damage. I know it because I tested it. Armor does nothing. So full damage amount is 700. If you're within 150 of the mine, you take 700. No matter what your armor is or anything, because this is just straight up boom. Then the partial damage amount is 300. So if you're in between 150 and 400, so 151 or to 400, you take 300. There you go. Now you know exactly how Goblin Landmines work. And it's all in the editor right there. It's super easy to find. What is the damage? Why is this messed up? It's not super easy to find, but now you know. And knowing is half the battle.
Knowing is half the battle. Alright, let's check out the other one.
The in-game description of the divine armor type, mostly used in campaign units for Archimonde, says divine beings only take damage from chaos attacks, while it should be divine beings take only 5% damage from attack types other than chaos. What is the reason behind this? Discrepancy? No, it's me being an idiot. So I have to take responsibility for this because I wrote all the tooltips in the game, and when it came to divine armor, I didn't understand it, and no one explained it to me, and because it's only on like 1 or 2 units in the entire game, it just didn't get caught. So my mistake is permanent. So I wrote divine beings only take damage from chaos attacks because I believe it was described to me that way when I wrote it, and then I just forgot. But writing divine beings take only 5% damage from attack types other than chaos would be a little confusing, so I'd probably rewrite it as divine armor reduces damage from all damage types except chaos. Why is there no...
He's responsible for those jank custom games where they put in divine armor on a character and you can't kill the damn thing.
Playable Dreadlords
unless you've got chaos damage. There's only like
primarily
2 heroes out of like 50 heroes that have chaos damage.
because it was sort of decided that they were all super campaign of the Warcraft.
But the Dreadlords are kind of like a separate faction in a way.
Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos. Primarily because it was sort of decided that they were all super deceptive and that giving the player control over one would make them less mysterious. So it just never sort of came up in the story that you would ever control a Dreadlord, because why would a Dreadlord who is deceptive and running all these schemes behind your back ever be controllable by you? It just didn't make sense story-wise. So that's one of those things where we avoided ludonarrative dissonance, which is to say when the game doesn't make sense in terms of what it's doing with you and the story it's telling. Maybe it's a bit of a missed opportunity. Metzen could have written a Dreadlord who changes sides or decides to help you out or any number of things, but we just said, why can't you build walls in Warcraft 3? So there was debate about this early on in development. I vaguely remember some of it, but effectively it was just that pathing was difficult enough, and then adding an additional layer of the player being able to build walls and cause more confusion would have been too much for the pathing. That might have been a cop-out, I think, later on, because we sort of figured out how to do pathing with like trees being knocked down and then potentially being resurrected and things like that. But I think at the time, given the limitations of the specs, maybe it was just too much. Ultimately, we decided that, you could use farms as walls, but I agree that it would have been interesting to have real walls, and I think that it was always kind of a split, but it was just decided that technically it was not achievable at the time. I imagine that could have been changed at some point, but we didn't. In regards to the Warcraft 3 engine, how much of it was used in World of Warcraft? What happened with the Alpha engine? This is sort of 2 different questions. So the Alpha War 3 engine became the normal engine, so nothing happened with the Alpha engine. And then in terms of how much of it was used in World of Warcraft, all of it. It was literally a code divide, and then now World of Warcraft builds on it. So 100%. Or at least it started that way. How much of it was stripped out and whatnot, I have no idea. But effectively, WoW is Warcraft 3 with a bunch of stuff stacked on top.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone's ever had access to the World of Warcraft editor. I don't think Blizzard have ever given that out. But I've seen a few videos of like where they show like a developer sort of like paving a map or something like that. And you can sort of see a similarity to the Warcraft 3. But it's not, it's sort of the UI, the buttons and everything are like different to the Warcraft 3 editor, so it's not quite the same.
Top of it, which is quite interesting to think about. But if you've ever seen like some of the more complicated user-made maps, I think you can see how that's true. If Mike O'Brien's vision prevailed, do you think that strategy genre would be different today? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But if you think about it, how many RTSs that came after War 3 kind of copied the RPG RTS model that we did? Not many. Assuming that they would have ignored it the same way, nothing much would have changed. Would the strategy genre be different today? Potentially, but in ways that I could never possibly fathom. I just don't have that sort of level of backwards prediction. Like, I can't imagine what exactly would be different. Maybe Warcraft 3 would have utterly failed. I don't know. How long did it take to make a level in Reign of Chaos?
That's an interesting point, Noodle. Imagine someone getting their hands on that editor and making some sort of OSRS private server with custom MMO content. Especially what people were doing with Warcraft 3 still. Yeah, it would be insane. Like if people had like the power to sort of create their own MMO with those tools. That would be pretty bonkers. People could create an entire freaking MMO.
In the Frozen Throne? It's a great question with a very complicated answer, but let me break it down as simply as I can, which is to say that if it was a very straightforward map, like let's say that it's basically a few things happen in the story, but no big deal, so it's just going to have an intro and an outro cinematic, and the main part of the mission is that you're going to fight a couple AIs, and that's basically it. You know, that's something that would take like 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 1 week, or even less, just to get it done in some way, especially if it's a smaller map and an early map. If it was a more complicated trigger map and like all sorts of stuff is going on, like the culling, for example, I remember it being almost 2 full months of me working on it. So the more that complicated the map, especially if you're like making your own AI and doing stupid shit like that, gonna take a long time. I know that this question's in relation to planning things out, like for people who want to make their own campaigns. I would allot 1 week for simple maps, 2 weeks for large simple maps, and then for anything that's like has a complicated premise in terms of like, you know, there's going to be a lot of triggers, dungeons, for example, where you need to have a lot of unique things and events happening and interesting stuff to find, then you want to allot at least 4 weeks, at least. And if it's a specifically a very complicated thing that you're not sure if it can even be done, 8 weeks for that map. Have you made any Warcraft 3 maps in your leisure time? No, I don't have any side projects or joke maps.
Sorry, Overclocked. You can't steal any of his content. Unlike I'm stealing here.
Who came up with the jokes in Warcraft 3's ending credits? I often like to play the last mission again because I wanted to see those credit animations. Alan Dilling made the ending credit maps. Between him and Sammy and the art team, I think he got a lot of input from them, but generally I think it was Alan Dilling. Previously, you mentioned Metzen wrote Warcraft 3 mission stories and scripts, and the designers called dibs on missions that spoke to them. Can you talk about that process? Was there ever a fight over a mission? Why did you pick the
I
one
think
you
he
did?
did answer
It's
this
hard
one.
to remember. But basically, I'll describe the process again. We would sit around a table in a meeting room, and we would read the dialogue for the missions out loud. We would each take a character, so I would play Arthas or something, and we would do a reading. And then at the end of that, we didn't necessarily choose right then. It potentially could be assigned to someone. In the case of the culling of Stratholme, it was just a mission that really spoke to me, and so I immediately called dibs. And I remember Scott Mercer getting a little bit upset about it. He's like, I didn't think we were doing that. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I wanted the mission. Did you want the mission? And he's like, well, no, but I didn't know we were calling dibs on missions. And I'm like, well, now you know. Sometimes it was like, oh, it's a dungeon mission. Dave should do that. And it would just get assigned to me that way. Like the dungeons of Dalaran didn't particularly speak to me, but because I was known for doing good trigger work, and a dungeon mission tends to need good trigger work, then I would get assigned the mission and things like that. And then anything with like a super complicated premise, like, oh, it has to have this wagon cart that moves around on its own, and it's not going to be AI controlled, so it all has to be done in the triggers, that would go to Michael Heiberg, because he was our lead tech designer, basically. So the first part of the decision-making process was basically who would be the best person to do this mission from a can they accomplish it standpoint.
Well, that makes
and then
sense.
it would be assigned.
That's how it
Second
should
would
be.
be who has strong feelings towards this mission, and then they might grab at it. And then the third consideration would be, does no one want to do this mission? Well, who doesn't have enough missions to do? Give it to them. And that did happen on a couple occasions, though I don't remember any specifics, so don't ask. I assume you and other designers were working on levels at the same time. If so, did you ever have a drive to make your levels better than the other designers? Personally, no. I never felt like it was a competition. I always felt like it was a cooperation. I know that not all the designers felt the same way that I did, and there were a few who decided that it was a competition, and then they would get weird about like hiding what they were working on. I'm not down for that. If I did something cool, I share it with everyone, and I want everyone to do the same. There was sort of like a mentality among a few people that like it was like a competition, and the worst level designer would be fired or something like that. But
But do you give them any training to help, Folger? Because you can't just like chuck someone into the deep end if they don't know how to swim first. They got to have some sort of like guidance towards building up to that level.
I don't think that was necessarily the case, and also it's better for everyone if you're more cooperative in sharing ideas, because like who cares if you had some cool thing in your map, like if it could have been used in other maps too, you should share that.
I am getting some pants. Obviously they'll either know a little bit or they'll have support from senior devs. Yeah. That's the training. You drown a couple of times until you figure it out and ask for help every 5 minutes. Well, you see, it's hard to do that at school. The only time I can really think of that kind of stuff was like at school. But you don't ever want to ask for help at school because it just gets you in trouble.
And like, then make everyone's stuff cooler, and then the whole game becomes cooler that way. And I think the more people who have that mentality, the better overall it is for the game. And luckily, there was enough people on Warcraft 3 that there was a lot of info sharing between us, except when time did not permit. But you could always go to other people for help when you needed it. What were some of the asset limitations you may have had as a level designer, and do you have any examples of how you got creative using something not the way it was originally designed? Oh, it's so hard to think off the top of my head. I know we would do things like, actually, let me show you. Let's go to Dungeons and Bella. So there were a couple tricks that we did use. We would repurpose things that weren't necessarily meant to be used that way. Like this, for example. This is actually
massive.
a super shrunk down thing that I put on the table as a model. And then you had to, there's a way to play with the Z-axis.
You push it
Anyways,
up.
that's one of the tricks.
Yeah.
Is that you could manipulate the Z-axis.
I think it's
Shrinking
control
things
and
up and down
numpad
and
plus or
this
whatever.
Is meant to be a background thing, not a model on a table. Like that's one of my favorite things to do, which, you know, sometimes infuriated the artists because they're like, no, it looks goofy, but whatever. And there are other tricks where you could use special effects to pretend it's like a flame trap. Here I put lightning strikes on the doors when they opened, just for fun. Oh, there's a secret there. I forgot about that. And what else? Like the usage of the runes wasn't really a thing. I just made it a thing.
Yeah.
I forgot the question. What were some of the asset limitations? Oh, asset limitations. I think the main thing was just that we couldn't get whatever we wanted. At some point, art was done, and we just had to use whatever was there. And so I think I've mentioned this before, but like there are certain items that are obviously like stupid, like the slippers of agility, for example. It's like Spider-Man's slippers. I don't think those are even going to be used. And then we just sort of use them for that. And then there's like a twig that we used for an early item, and
It's
those
like
just
+1
came
agility,
from
that
like
thing, or
leftover icons
intelligence.
that Sammy had made, but weren't used for anything. And there are some quest items that are also basically that, where Sammy had made an icon just for fun. We didn't necessarily know what we needed for the campaign items, and then it was just like, well, you know, art's done in that regard, so just use whatever you got. And so we did. There's a lot of them. Most of the keys, I think, ended up that way. There was a period where we
Sorry,
spent
I know
like
I'm
almost
blocking
a
them a
whole
bit.
week just going through all of the random art and like picking stuff out that we could put in and use for something. And that was cool. Hopefully that answers the question enough. When starting a new level, would you have to do any research on existing locations or other media as reference to the levels you would eventually build?
When starting a new level, would you have to do any research on existing locations? I think that's what some map editors have done, or rather map designers, level designers for like the 1v1 maps have done before in the past, is they'll take like a real world location, although that's more sort of like in the last 15 years or so when World of Warcraft's already had some time to build up some extra area locations. Or you can take a real world location and then sort of like design around that.
To do any research on existing locations or other media as reference to the levels you would eventually build? No. No, we didn't. Because at the time, you know, what reference was there for most of these things? It was kind of like vague maps, and like maybe there was a Warcraft 2 level that you could look at, but not really. For the majority of them, we didn't really look at anything. For example, for Strathholm, I didn't look at anything. That was just sort of like off the top of my head. This is, I guess, what it would be. A lot of it was sort of like on the fly kind of stuff, because either nothing necessarily existed for it, or concept art existed, or the stuff in the previous game was just so old and archaic that it wasn't worth looking at. We probably could have done more due diligence there, but yeah. If you are making a location that is supposed to be something, certainly you should do some research. And also, when you're initially laying out the map, you have to consider all of the things that you need to have happen on the map, and you kind of want to build areas for those functions and then build areas in between. That's sort of how I would do that. How would you playtest your levels? Did you rely solely on QA and their feedback, or would you and the other designers play each other's levels and give feedback beforehand? Whenever anyone completed a level, we would have everyone play that mission, and that continued close to the end of development, but at some point it became like we just don't have time to play each other's missions because we need to complete ours. And at that point we began to rely.
I think that's actually really good. If they obviously time constraints and all that, but because they're all designers, one guy might have like a really good idea that you just didn't think of. It only just occurred to you like after he's mentioned it, and he's like, oh yeah, no, I could totally do that. And you could like redesign your level just a little bit to implement it. So if you have other designers, people who actually know about creating, then that could actually really emphasize and improve everyone's maps in the long run.
More heavily
I don't think WoW devs even play World of Warcraft, no.
on QA and internal feedback, and I think it was around then that the artists were kind of mostly done with their stuff, and so most of them will be able to play campaign missions and give feedback, and once it's done with the triggers and stuff, they would go in and do an art pass, and then we would get it back and we fix the triggers that they always would break. Then
I'll be doing Hom 5 after this.
there would be a sound pass as well. So we relied on everyone's feedback, and I think the rushed nature towards the end maybe was detrimental to certain levels because of that. So I wish that we had continued that process the entire time and just taken the time to do it, as opposed to rushing through and everyone was like, I just got to finish mine. I can't worry about your stuff anymore. It's not a good attitude, but it was forced upon us by the schedule. Will there ever be a Warcraft 4? Well, you know, that's an interesting question right now.
Ask Microsoft.
I think that the possibility of a Warcraft 4 is maybe higher than ever. There's a number of things that need to be answered in terms of how is Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard going to actually work out. But I would say we won't really know the answer to that for another year. And that's assuming that it goes through at all, because there could be like an antitrust case and things like that. All sorts of things could make this fall apart. But I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. And once Blizzard is safer in the arms of Microsoft, I think that the possibility, especially given Phil Spencer's statements about like what sort of games he wanted to see, like he was talking about like, oh, I want to see Hexen. So he's clearly a classic games he wanted to see. Like he was talking about like, oh, I want to see Hexen.
Hexen. Oof. Has anyone played Hexen? I certainly have. I remember being tortured in that game as a kid because it had lots of different hub levels. I think if I played it now as an adult, I'd understand it a lot better. But as a kid, it had like levels within levels, and you would go through portals and then get back to the main hub and then go to another place. And there was a sort of real tediousness of the puzzle design in order to progress in a level. It wasn't just about killing monsters, it's about finding the keys and then locating the correct places to go. Heretic I really liked, because I think that was, at least it felt when I played it, and that came before Hexen, more straightforward. Hexen was like a more complicated version of Heretic. And yeah, I have bittersweet feelings about Hexen, because Hexen has like some cool creature designs, and sort of like the weapons in it are really awesome, and it just looks like an improved graphical Heretic. But the actual gameplay, again, is like, the gameplay was brutal. So yeah.
So he's clearly a classic games kind of guy, and maybe that department could be revitalized at Blizzard, but that primarily depends on how Activision and Blizzard are split, or if they are split. Like, does Blizzard become an independent studio, and then does Microsoft dismantle any Activision employees who are put in charge at Blizzard, which I think he should do. He should pull them out like the parasites they are. Oops.
What's this spice?
Kind of guy. See, like he was talking about like, oh, I want to see Hexen. So he's clearly a classic games kind of guy, and maybe that department could be revitalized at Blizzard, but that primarily depends on how Activision and Blizzard are split, or if they are split. Like, does Blizzard become an independent studio, and then does Microsoft dismantle any Activision employees who are put in charge at Blizzard? Which
I think the audit is at least trying to do a fair bit of that by default. So Microsoft buy Blizzard whilst they're under an audit investigation from California, so that they're finding the bad people. Obviously they probably won't get everyone, but hopefully they get a lot of them, and that will sort of automatically remove some of the weeds before they've even got control of the company.
I think he should do. He should pull them out like the parasites they are. Oops, that was a hot take. If you had asked me before this acquisition, I would have said there was absolutely no hope of a Warcraft 4. But now that Microsoft has Warcraft in their IP base, or once that deal is inked and dry and solid and there's no antitrust, the possibility of a Warcraft 4 is higher than ever before. I don't know the exact statistics of it occurring, but higher than ever before, and that's a good thing, I think. What studios do you feel evoke the mentality of the old school Blizzard you remember? The good parts, not the toxic stuff. This is a good question, but difficult to answer until I've worked at those studios. What people propose their company culture is as opposed to what it actually is tends to be two different things. In terms of like who espouses that mentality of the old school Blizzard, I think a number of studios do, and ironically most of them have been under the Microsoft umbrella, which is to say that they're owned and funded by Microsoft. So In Exile is a good example. I felt pretty good there, though obviously didn't get to have a permanent job, but oh well. And I'm very excited for what Frost Giant is working on and what they could be. I know Tim very well, and we've had discussions, and I'm very excited about what the potential is for that studio and the company culture that he portrayed to me, and his mentality towards game development are very promising in terms of what Frost Giant could deliver. So
I think a lot of us are kind of curious as to what Frost Giant are up to. Time will tell with that one.
Those are two examples. In terms of other studios, if I didn't work there, I can't really say. I have no idea, because they can evoke a certain mentality, but is it real? I don't know. The more I interview with certain companies and people, the more skeptical I become of their future potential to continue to make good games. CD Projekt Red being one of them, and Remedy has me worried a little bit. Again, I never worked at those studios, so just one interview is not enough to really tell what a company culture is. You kind of have to work there for almost a year before you're really going to understand what's going on. Though actually I'm getting better at it, and I can sort of figure out the company culture within the first few months. There's something to be said for that. But until I'm hired there, who knows? Or work with them, which is also potential to have happen. And that's it. I know it's only 23 questions, but two of them were basically 2 questions in one, so I'm counting this as 25, okay? Now that that's done, I think I can solidly say that my part in the Warcraft AMA is absolutely done. I definitely cannot answer the rest of the questions that we still have on the books. Tim has promised to take his part in the AMA and answer the questions for campaign design that I can't.
Quick, throw more questions at him.
He was the campaign lead, so he can definitely answer more of those questions than I could, and obviously he has his perspective as well, so he may have different answers to some of the questions I've already answered. So that's exciting. Still reaching out, hoping Chris Metzen will take part at some point, but he hasn't responded, whereas Tim is guaranteed to take part, and it's just a question of when he has the time, and unfortunately he's been extremely busy, and we just have to respect that, and don't harass him, please. So I hope you enjoyed my final part in the Warcraft AMA. I will be answering all of the other questions for other games I have worked on and other studios I've worked at, and game industry questions. All of that will be answered in time as part of a different series. But I had a lot of fun working with Abelhawk on this one, and I'm hoping to continue that, even though I won't be in it, with more people participating in this Warcraft AMA, and I will continue to work on this and try to get people working on it all the way up to July of this year, at which point it will be the 20th anniversary of Warcraft 3, and then we can, I think, put this to rest and just appreciate all
Warcraft 3 20 years later. I'm not doing that video.
Nostalgic memories, but move on with our lives to new games and new greener pastures together.
We'll see, DesignerDave. We'll see.
Who's that cheeky chap? He must have been in the same room because the microphone was in front of Dave. So how did Dave not see that guy? Deji says, I think they mentioned this before, but the RTS genre is literally like 3 games. Do you think Warcraft 3 is still at the top despite the reforged disaster piece? Well, this is going back to why I think a lot of people are really curious about Frost Giant, because RTSs can come out, but I don't think any of them are going to be ones that you kind of stick with. Do you know what I mean? Like, really feel like, oh, this is the next game I'm going to really be playing for a long, long time, that kind of thing. The same thing with MMOs. Like, tons and tons of MMOs have come out, but none of them have really stuck around. You play them for the first month or two, and then you fall off. And I feel like that's the same thing. Like Age of Empires 4, I really enjoyed like the campaign and all that, but I didn't feel the need to stick around for like the multiplayer aspects of it. It just didn't have anywhere near the draw of Warcraft 3 in that regards. But I think Frost Giant it really comes down to how they create the engine, what it looks like. Not so much what it looks like, how it plays, really how it plays, because that's what Warcraft 3 has above like so many other RTS games, is it just has insanely good gameplay. Like the engine and everything about it just runs and plays so nicely. Obviously not reforged, but the actual original Warcraft 3, the custom games that you can create from it, it's a bit of a hidden gem, really. Well, it is, I think, a bit of a hidden gem in a way, because I feel like Warcraft 3 should be getting more respect than it currently does. I think it's partially to do with the industry changing and how people view games in general. A lot of the innocence from back then is gone. Oh yeah, I think we're screwed, really. It always feels that way, though. You always think, oh, the next generation, what it'd be like to be them, like growing up with mobile games and all this kind of stuff. And you just get normalized to it, to the point where then there'll be something that happens in their lifetime where mobile games were fine to them, but then something else even more degenerate gets sort of put in place, and they're like, man, mobile games were so pure, this new thing is terrible. Like, that's just life, isn't it, in general? Like, there's always something that comes out that just makes life even worse. It seems like an inevitability, though, and not something you can really avoid. It is, yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of any games that are going to come out really these days where you're not just going to get screwed over. You would never think, when back then when you were buying games, that there was an incentive to screw the customer over. But these days, there's loads of incentives, because they're microtransactions. They can make money, tons of money, making the gameplay technically worse, making your experience technically worse than it could be if it was properly balanced for the game just to be released as a one-time release. But it isn't. It's designed so that you go, man, I wish it was quicker for me to kill these creatures. Man, I wish it was quicker for me to skin these beasts. Man, I wish it was quicker for me to pick up these herbs. Oh, look, there's a little booster pack that I can buy that's going to improve my skinning or leveling or killing rate by 25%. Well, that would make my gameplay a lot more enjoyable. Yeah, it's very hard to sort of honestly believe that any game being created these days hasn't got some ulterior motive that's going to effectively, deliberately make the game worse just so they can milk the player for money. Sucks. What is my skin routine? It's flawless. My skin routine is don't go outside. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks, DesignerDave and Abelhawk. And yeah, I don't know if that will be the last. There's still more Warcraft 3 questions, I'm sure, to answer, but we'll see.